I love my wife, but I don't know what came over me that night. I got the call just after 6 in the morning. House fire. Residential address. Woman found inside, critically injured. Her husband said an intruder had broken in, attacked her in her bed. He chased the man through the garden, but the intruder had vanished. But how is that possible? You slept together on same bed. Why will the detective think I'm lying? Even if I hate my wife, that is none of your concern. Get that into your fucking brain and leave me alone.
I cannot remember anything that happened to me, detective.
Blood doesn't lie. It can't. It goes where physics sends it. It tells you exactly where everyone was standing and exactly where they weren't.
There are places in this country where serious crime feels like something that happened somewhere else, to someone else. Findon Valley is one of those places. Small, quiet, the kind of village where people still wave at each other across the street. Valerie and Derek Tully, Jack, everyone called them, had lived on this street for years. 50 years of marriage. Neighbors said they were devoted to each other. It was the very start of the new year. The holidays had barely ended. The decorations were still up in most homes on the quiet streets of Findon Valley, a small, unassuming village on the outskirts of Worthing in West Sussex. It is the kind of place where neighbors still know each other's names, where curtains twitch with concern rather than malice, and where the idea of serious crime feels as remote as a thunderstorm on a clear blue day. Detective Sergeant Mick Curtis was not a man easily shaken. In his years of service with Sussex Police, he had seen enough of human nature at its worst to have developed a kind of professional armor, the ability to walk into rooms that would unravel most people and think clearly, methodically, step by step. But the call that came through at around 6 in the morning on that early January day was different. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to walk into the strangest case of his career. The radio crackled with news of a house fire. Officers already at the scene. A bungalow on a residential street. As Curtis drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the address, he could see it before he arrived, a column of smoke still rising into the pale winter sky, catching the first gray light of morning. The blue lights of police cars, ambulances, and fire engines strobed against the surrounding houses. Neighbors stood on their doorsteps in dressing gowns, arms folded against the cold, watching with the particular expression people wear when they know something is wrong but don't yet understand the full shape of it. The bungalow belonged to a Mr. and Mrs. Tully. Valerie, known to those who loved her as Val, was 62 years old. Her husband was Derek Tully, though everyone who knew him called him Jack. They had lived in that bungalow for years. They had, by all accounts, a life of settled routine and mutual affection. They were, as their neighbors and friends would later describe them, a loving couple. But as Mick Curtis stepped through what remained of the front door that morning, guided by firefighters still working to make the structure safe, he felt something he had learned to trust more than any witness statement or piece of physical evidence. A feeling, a deep professional unease that told him the story he was about to be told was not the whole story. Jack Tully's account was delivered with what seemed like the urgency and distress of a man who had just survived a nightmare. He told officers that he had been asleep next to his wife when he was awoken by the sound of thudding, a terrible, rhythmic noise in the darkness of their bedroom. He realized, he said, that someone had broken into their home, an intruder, and that intruder was beating his wife as she lay beside him. Still wearing his pajamas, Jack had leapt from bed and given chase. He pursued the attacker through the bungalow, out into the rear garden, trying desperately to catch the man who had assaulted Valerie. But the intruder had vanished, escaped, and when Jack looked back at his home, he saw the fire had already started. It was a dramatic story. It was also Curtis quickly began to suspect a fabricated one. The first problem was the fire itself. House fires in the ordinary course of things tend to start from a single point. A discarded cigarette, an electrical fault, an unattended candle. What the firefighters showed Curtis that morning was something entirely different. There were 4 separate points of ignition inside the bungalow. A chair in the lounge. 3 additional spots scattered around the same room. For fires started independently. The word for that is not accident. The word for that is arson. The second problem was the garden. Officers examined every inch of the rear of the property. looking for the point through which this mysterious intruder had made his escape. There was none. No broken fence panels, no disturbed earth, no scuff marks on the walls, no evidence that any person had exited through that garden in any direction at all. The intruder, if he existed, was a ghost. The third problem, and this was the one that lodged itself most stubbornly in Curtis's mind, was Jack's response when officers asked him if he wanted to visit his wife at hospital. Valerie was in a critical condition. She had been beaten about the head with extraordinary force. The injuries were severe. There was genuine uncertainty about whether she would survive. Any husband, any person who loved another person would, in that moment, have rushed to their bedside, would have demanded to be taken there immediately, would have needed to see them. Jack Tully said he would rather remember her the way she was. No one had suggested she was dead. She was alive, critically injured, fighting for her life in Worthing Hospital. And her husband of 50 years did not want to see her. It was really quite concerning, Curtis would later recall, that he wouldn't want to see his wife if it maybe were the last few minutes of her life. Mick Curtis returned to the crime scene with fresh eyes and a growing conviction. And the crime scene began to speak. The front bedroom of the bungalow was where Valerie had been found. It was also where the most important evidence lay, but it was disappearing with every passing minute. The firefighters doing their job were still running hoses through the structure. Water was cascading through the ceiling, soaking the mattress, diluting the blood, washing away the fibers and traces that forensic science depends upon. The ceiling itself threatened to come down at any moment. Curtis and his team were in a race against the building itself. They worked fast. The bedding was retrieved, soaking wet, but recoverable. The headboard splattered with blood. The pillow, and then almost obscured among the wreckage, a broomstick handle, lying on the bedroom floor. Later, forensic analysis would confirm what Curtis suspected the moment he saw it. This was the weapon. This was what had been used to beat Valerie Tully about the head with such savage, deliberate force. But there was another detail in that bedroom that struck Curtis as significant in a quieter, more intimate way. On the bedside cabinet, Valerie's side, a bottle of nail varnish had been spilled. It seemed like a small thing, but those who knew Valerie Tully described her as a woman immaculate in her presentation, particularly proud of her nails. Nail varnish didn't simply fall over by accident. It suggested a disturbance, a struggle perhaps at close quarters, an argument that had escalated into something far more terrible. And then there were the pajamas. Jack Tully had been wearing them when officers arrived on the scene, pajama top, pajama bottoms, and a pair of slippers. Standard enough for a man who claimed to have been dragged from sleep by a violent intruder. But as Curtis looked more carefully, he noticed something. There was blood on Jack's pajama top. And there was something else, something almost too small and too domestic to be meaningful at first glance. There was nail varnish on his pajama top. The same nail varnish that had been spilled on Valerie's bedside cabinet. Valerie Tully spent 6 weeks in hospital. 6 weeks in which the investigation stalled, waiting, as investigations sometimes have to wait, for a human being to survive. The team at Worthing Hospital worked to save her, and slowly, agonizingly, she pulled through. She regained consciousness. She lived. It should have been a moment the investigation broke wide open. Here was the victim. Here was the woman who had been in that bedroom when it happened. She could name the attacker. She could describe exactly what had occurred in those terrible minutes before the fire. She could give Mick Curtis everything he needed. Instead, she gave him something far more devastating. Valerie Tully had no memory of the attack. None at all. The severe head injuries she had sustained had erased the events of that night entirely. She could not tell Curtis who had beaten her because she genuinely did not know. The part of her mind that held those memories was simply gone. And in the space where that evidence should have been, something else grew. Because when detectives spoke to Valerie about her husband, about Jack, about their 50-year marriage, she spoke about him with warmth and certainty. He would never do anything like this, she told them. She wouldn't accept it even as a possibility. As far as Valerie Tully was concerned, her husband was innocent and she loved him. For Mick Curtis, this was both heartbreaking and deeply complicated. His prime suspect was a man whose victim not only couldn't remember the crime, but actively defended him. The case was now resting entirely on what the forensic evidence could prove. Evidence retrieved from a waterlogged, burning bungalow under the most difficult conditions imaginable. It was, as Curtis himself would describe it, a mountain to climb. What Mick Curtis needed was not just evidence that placed Jack Tully at the scene. Jack lived there. Of course, his DNA was everywhere. What he needed was evidence that contradicted Jack's specific account of events. Evidence that proved the story about the intruder was false. Evidence that demonstrated Jack's relationship to the violence, not merely to the location. The answer came from a forensic scientist with a specialism in bloodstain pattern analysis, one of the most painstaking and counterintuitive fields in all of forensic science. Blood, when it hits a surface, tells a story. The shape of the droplets, the direction of the spray, the distribution across a surface, all of it encodes information about the position of the victim, the force of the impact, and critically, the position of anyone else who might have been in the room. Jack Tully's account placed him in the bed next to Valerie at the moment she was attacked. He had been asleep alongside her, he said, when the intruder struck. He woke to the sound of the beating. He was right there. If that were true, the forensic scientist explained, the blood spatter would tell a very specific story. A person being struck repeatedly about the head bleeds explosively. The spray radiates outward from the impact point in all directions. Anyone lying immediately adjacent to the victim in bed on the same mattress would receive a distinctive pattern of blood spray across their body. It would be unavoidable, inescapable, a physical record written on their skin and clothing. To test this, the forensic team did something that exists somewhere between science and theater. They obtained a pig's head, pigs having the closest tissue density and skin composition to human beings of any commonly available animal, and coated it with artificial blood. Then they placed it on a bed in the position Valerie would have occupied. Mick Curtis, playing the role of Jack, lay beside it, and the scientist struck the pig's head with a stick similar to the broomstick handle found at the scene. The spray was immediate and comprehensive. Blood misted across Curtis's face, his hands, his pajama top. It covered the bedding beside the pig's head. It hit the headboard in a distinctive fan pattern. And critically, when Curtis moved away from the mattress, the area where he had been lying was clearly delineated by the absence of blood spray. A clean space in the pattern, the shape of a human body preserved in negative. Now the scientists compared this to what they had actually found on the Tullis bedding. The blood spatter on the real bedding was even across the entire surface of the mattress. There was no clean space, no negative impression of a sleeping body. No evidence that anyone had been lying in the bed when the blows were struck. The mattress told them with absolute forensic clarity that the bed had been empty, or at least that Jack Tully had not been in it when Valerie was beaten. And Jack's pajama top? The blood on it was not the explosive spray pattern of a man lying next to someone being beaten. It was a different pattern entirely. Contact blood, transfer blood, the kind of blood that ends up on clothing when someone is close to a victim in a very different way. Mick Curtis had his proof. His account was false, Curtis said quietly years later. And there was no other reasonable explanation for what had happened that night. The picture that emerged from the forensic evidence was this. At some point during those cold, early January hours, something had happened between Jack and Valerie Tully in the bedroom of their bungalow. An argument, perhaps. A confrontation that had been building for reasons the investigation was never fully able to establish. Whatever the trigger, it had ended with Jack Tully seizing the broomstick handle and beating his wife of 50 years about the head with it. Then he had set the house on fire. Not once, not in a single panic moment of arson, but in 4 deliberate locations methodically with the intention of destroying evidence and, it seemed, of killing Valerie entirely. He had smashed the glass in the lounge door to manufacture the evidence of a break-in. He had invented the intruder, the chase through the garden, the dramatic pursuit into the dark. He had constructed an entire false narrative and delivered it to police officers while his wife lay barely alive on the floor of their burning home. And then he had declined to visit her at the hospital. The glass shards found in his pajamas, microscopic fragments consistent with the lounge door that had been smashed from the inside, not the outside, placed him at the point of that manufactured break-in. The blood spatter evidence destroyed his alibi for the attack itself. The nail varnish on his clothing connected him directly to the struggle in the bedroom, and the 4 separate points of ignition confirmed that no opportunistic intruder had set those fires. Jack Tully was charged with the attempted murder of his wife, Valerie. He stood trial, maintaining his innocence throughout. The forensic evidence spoke louder than any witness, louder even than the victim herself, who to the end could not bring herself to believe what the evidence so plainly showed. He was found guilty. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Valerie Tully survived. She recovered physically from the injuries that had come so close to killing her. What she survived emotionally, the knowledge of what had happened, the destruction of a 50-year belief in the man she loved, is a question that only she can answer. And in a quiet office in West Sussex, Mick Curtis closed the file on the strangest, most grueling, most personal case of his career. The mountain had been climbed,